Miss Loretta was a sweet old lady who lived in a small, peaceful town, tucked between long country roads and quiet woods. She was in her late 60s, with silver hair always tied neatly under a scarf and a warm smile that made everyone feel welcome. For years, she had run a small diner at the edge of town. It wasn't fancy or modern, just a cozy little place with red booths, a jukebox that still played old songs, and the smell of homemade pie that filled the air every morning. People in town called her Grandma Loretta, even those who weren't related to her. She treated everyone like family. When someone was sad, she would pour them a cup of coffee and listen. When kids came in with no money, she would slip them a cookie or a slice of pie and say, "You can pay me when the sun smiles again." Her diner was more than just a place to eat. It was a place where people felt safe, where kindness lived quietly behind every plate she served. But times were hard. A new highway had opened nearby and most travelers didn't pass through town anymore. Business slowed down and the diner often sat empty for hours. Loretta tried to stay positive, humming gospel songs as she wiped down the counter, but deep down she worried. Bills were piling up and she wasn't sure how long she could keep the lights on. Still, every morning before sunrise, she opened the doors, turned on the neon open sign, and prayed that maybe, today, things would get better. That afternoon, the weather changed. The sky, once clear and bright, turned dark and heavy. The air felt strange, still and thick, like the whole world was holding its breath. Loretta stood at the diner window watching the clouds gather. She could smell the rain coming, that earthy scent that always made her think of home and old memories. A storm was on its way, and it didn't look small. She began stacking the chairs from the outdoor tables and pulling the flowers inside. The wind had started to whistle, rattling the windows. The few customers she had hurried home before the rain began. By evening, the town was quiet, the streets empty. Only the flickering diner sign glowed through the curtain of rain. Loretta sighed and turned up the radio. The weatherman warned that the storm would be strong, lightning, thunder, heavy rain all night. "Well, Lord," she said softly, "guess it's just you and me tonight." She poured herself a cup of coffee, sat by the window and watched as the rain began to dance against the glass. Hours passed, and the sound of thunder rolled across the hills. Loretta began cleaning up, ready to close early when she heard it. A low rumbling sound, not from the sky but from the road outside. It grew louder and closer like a pack of wild beasts. She peeked through the fogged window and saw a row of motorcycles pulling into the parking lot, headlights cutting through the rain. 9 riders, big men wearing black leather jackets, their faces hidden under helmets. The patches on their backs read "Hell's Angels." Loretta's heart skipped a beat. She had heard stories about biker gangs, tough, rough men who caused trouble wherever they went. For a moment she froze, unsure what to do. Should she lock the door? Pretend the diner was closed? But something in her heart told her not to. The bikers parked their motorcycles and stood there in the pouring rain, dripping wet and looking around, clearly searching for shelter. The storm was growing worse by the minute, lightning flashing across the sky. Loretta took a deep breath and whispered to herself, "They're just people, Loretta. Just people caught in the rain." She unlocked the door, pushed it open, and called out, "Y'all come on in before you catch your death out there." Her voice was gentle but firm, the kind that carried warmth and authority all at once. The bikers looked surprised. Slowly, one by one, they stepped inside, shaking off the water and wiping their boots on the mat. The diner filled with the smell of rain and leather. They stood awkwardly near the counter, unsure how to act. Loretta smiled and said, "Sit down, boys. You look like you could use a hot meal." The leader, a tall man with a gray beard, nodded politely. "Ma'am, we don't want to cause any trouble. We just need to wait out the storm." She waved her hand. "Ain't no trouble if you're polite. Storm's nasty tonight. Coffee's on the house." As they sat, Loretta moved behind the counter, pouring steaming coffee into mugs and serving bowls of soup she had made earlier. The bikers thanked her quietly, their rough voices softening with gratitude. The rain pounded outside, but inside the diner glowed warm and golden. It was a strange sight, the gentle grandma and the fierce bikers sharing a peaceful moment as thunder rolled across the sky. Loretta didn't know who they were or where they came from. She only knew they were cold, hungry, and human, and that was enough. As she watched them eat, she thought about how the world always seemed divided by fear, how people were quick to judge based on how someone looked. But sitting there, she saw kindness in their eyes, the kind that only needed a chance to be seen. That night, as the storm howled outside, Loretta's little diner became a haven of warmth and understanding. She had no idea that by simply opening her door and her heart, she was setting in motion a story that would soon travel far beyond that small town. A story of compassion, respect, and the power of a single act of kindness. The storm outside had turned wild. Rain lashed the windows like handfuls of pebbles, and thunder cracked across the night sky. Inside the little diner, Miss Loretta's coffee pot hissed and steamed while the radio softly hummed an old soul tune. She was wiping the counter, humming along, when the sound of engines cut through the storm again, low, rough, and powerful. At first she thought maybe she had imagined it. But then the sound grew louder. Headlights flickered through the sheets of rain, glowing like ghosts in the fog. Loretta peered through the window and her heart skipped. There they were. 9 huge motorcycles glistening wet under the streetlight, their engines rumbling like thunder on the ground. The bikes rolled to a stop right in front of the diner. Steam rose from their pipes, and the men who rode them sat still for a moment as if unsure what to do next. They wore black leather jackets, boots heavy with mud, and patches on their backs that read, Hell's Angels. Even through the rain, Loretta could see the skull and wings emblem. For a second, fear crept into her chest. She had heard things, stories of fights, chaos, and danger. Old folks in town used to say, if you see those bikers coming, lock your doors. But as she looked closer, she saw something else. These men weren't loud or wild. They looked tired, cold, soaked to the bone. One of them sneezed. Another rubbed his hands together, trying to warm them. They weren't here to cause trouble. They were just looking for shelter. Loretta whispered to herself, Lord, give me strength. Then she walked to the door, her slippers tapping softly on the floor. The rain was pounding, the wind pushing against the doorframe, but she opened it wide anyway. Y'all best come in before that storm carries you off, she called out. The men looked up, surprised. The leader, tall, broad-shouldered, with a graying beard, hesitated. Ma'am, we don't want to intrude, he said, his voice deep and rough like gravel. Nonsense, Loretta said, waving him in. Ain't nobody intruding if they're cold and wet. Come on now, I got hot soup and dry chairs. The bikers exchanged uncertain glances, then began walking toward the diner. Water dripped from their jackets as they stepped inside one by one. The warm air hit them like a blanket. They smelled of rain, gasoline, and road dust, but Loretta didn't mind. She'd seen harder days and tougher folks in her lifetime. Sit down, boys, she said with a smile, grabbing a handful of towels. You can use these to dry off. They muttered thank yous and sat awkwardly at the booths, unsure how to act. Most places didn't welcome men like them. People crossed the street when they saw those jackets. But this woman, this little grandma, was treating them like guests. Coffee? She asked. All 9 hands went up. Loretta chuckled. Thought so. She poured steaming coffee into mugs and set them down in front of each man. The smell of it filled the diner, mixing with the scent of wet leather and fried onions from the grill. Then she ladled out bowls of thick, hot chicken soup and slid them across the counter. Eat up. It's not much, but it's warm, she said. The men dug in. At first they ate in silence, glancing around, unsure what to say. But slowly the tension began to melt. The youngest one, with tattoos up his neck, smiled shyly and said, Ma'am, this is the best thing I've eaten in weeks. Loretta grinned. That's because you've been eating gas station food, sugar. You need a proper meal. The others laughed softly, and for the first time they relaxed. The leader, whose name she later learned was Hank, leaned forward and said, You know, most people don't open doors for us. Not even when it's raining like this. Loretta raised an eyebrow. Well, I'm not most people. I was raised to help folks who need it. Storm don't care who you are, and neither should kindness. Her words hung in the air. The bikers looked at her differently after that. Not as a stranger, but as someone strong, someone with a heart bigger than her fears. They talked for hours. Hank told her they were riding cross-country to attend a memorial for a fallen friend. The storm had caught them in the middle of nowhere, and her diner had been the only light they'd seen for miles. Loretta listened quietly, nodding as they spoke about loyalty, brotherhood, and loss. When the lightning cracked again, one of the men flinched, spilling a bit of his coffee. Loretta patted his arm and said gently, Don't worry, sweetie. God's just moving his furniture up there. They all laughed. A big, deep belly laugh that filled the diner louder than the thunder. It was the kind of laughter that breaks tension. that heals. By midnight, the storm was still raging, so Loretta told them they could sleep in the diner. She brought out extra blankets from the back room and laid them on the booths. The bikers thanked her over and over, not knowing how to repay such unexpected kindness. Before turning off the lights, Loretta looked at them all curled up like tired travelers and whispered to herself, "They ain't angels from hell tonight, just men who needed a little grace." The rain kept falling, but inside, the diner was calm, warm, peaceful. It was a sight no one in that town would have believed. 9 Hell's Angels asleep under a cross-stitched sign above the counter that read, "Do good, and good will find you." And for Miss Loretta, that night was only the beginning of something much bigger than she could ever imagine. The storm had calmed a little, but rain still whispered against the diner windows like 1,000 soft fingers. The clock on the wall ticked past midnight, and the neon sign outside buzzed faintly, painting a red glow across the faces of the bikers inside. For the first time in a long while, the little diner felt alive again. Miss Loretta moved slowly behind the counter, refilling cups of coffee and humming an old church tune under her breath. The men were quiet at first, their voices low, their laughter unsure, but something was changing in the air, a slow, gentle warmth spreading through the room like sunlight after rain. The bikers had come in drenched, strangers with hard eyes and rough hands. But after a few hours under the care of that gentle old woman, they started to look less like a gang and more like a group of weary travelers who had finally found rest. "Y'all want some pie?" Loretta asked, setting down her coffee pot. "It ain't fresh out the oven, but it's still good enough to make you smile." The youngest biker, a tall man with a scar over his eyebrow, grinned shyly. "Ma'am, if it tastes half as good as that soup, I'll take 2 slices." The others chuckled and Loretta laughed, a warm, bubbling sound that filled every corner of the diner. "Well, now you're talking," she said, slicing generous pieces of her famous apple pie and topping each with a scoop of melting vanilla ice cream. The smell of cinnamon and butter drifted through the diner, mixing with the rain-soaked air. The bikers dug in eagerly, and soon spoons clinked softly against plates as conversation began to flow. Hank, the leader, leaned back in his seat and looked around the diner. His eyes softened. "You know, Miss Loretta, I can't remember the last time we sat anywhere this peaceful. Folks see our jackets and cross the street. They see trouble where there ain't none." Loretta nodded thoughtfully as she wiped down the counter. "People fear what they don't understand, baby. But I don't see trouble when I look at y'all. I just see tired souls who need a little comfort." There was a pause. The bikers glanced at one another, surprised. No one had ever spoken to them like that. Not like they were people. Not like they mattered. The youngest one, named Cody, cleared his throat. "You remind me of my grandma," he said softly. "She used to cook for everyone in our neighborhood, even the ones who didn't deserve it." Loretta smiled. "That's what grandmas do. We feed you whether you're hungry or not. It's our way of saying we care." The group laughed again, this time with real warmth. It was strange how easy it felt, how natural it was to sit there in that little diner, safe from the storm, sharing stories with a woman who didn't care about their reputation, only their hearts. After pie came more coffee, then more laughter. They told her about their journeys across states, the friends they'd lost, the places they'd seen. Each story was rough around the edges, but honest. In return, Loretta told them about her late husband, about the diner they had built together, and about how she was trying to keep it alive 1 cup of coffee at a time. When she spoke about him, her voice softened. "He used to sit right there by the window every morning," she said, pointing to the corner booth. "Said he liked watching the sun rise over the road. Told me the diner was a place for travelers, folks just passing through, needing a moment of peace." Hank followed her gaze and nodded slowly. "He was right, ma'am. This place, it feels like peace." Loretta smiled, though her eyes glistened. "Thank you, son." Thunder rumbled again, but it didn't seem so scary now. The storm outside had become part of the rhythm, the soft music behind a night that no one wanted to end. As the hours slipped by, some of the bikers began to doze off in their booths, their heads resting against the cool glass. Loretta brought out blankets and covered them gently one by one. They looked so different now, peaceful, almost childlike. Before turning off the lights, Hank approached the counter. He looked at Loretta, then at the steaming coffee pot still half full. "You didn't have to do all this, ma'am," he said quietly. "We didn't deserve it." Loretta shook her head. Nobody needs to earn kindness, baby. It's free, but it's worth more than gold. For a long moment, they just stood there in silence. Two souls from different worlds, connected by something bigger than both of them. Thank you, Hank finally said. You've given us more than a meal. You've given us something I ain't felt in years. Home. Loretta smiled, patting his hand. Then don't let it be the last time you feel it. As dawn crept over the horizon, the rain slowed to a whisper. The first rays of light touched the diner's sign, making it glow soft and golden. The bikers packed their things quietly, leaving the booths neat and the dishes stacked by the counter. Before they left, Hank slipped something into the tip jar, a folded $100 bill and a note that said, "For the lady who reminds us what kindness looks like." Loretta found it after they'd gone. She smiled through tears and whispered to herself, "Bless their hearts." She thought that was the end of it. A beautiful night, a rare connection, a memory she'd keep forever. But she didn't know what was coming next, because the very next morning the sound of engines would return. Only this time it wouldn't be 9, it would be 100. Morning came quietly. The storm had finally passed, leaving behind a sky washed clean and pale like a fresh canvas. The world outside was still dripping. Rainwater slid down tree branches. Puddles shimmered on the road, and the air smelled of earth and peace. Inside the diner, a soft golden light filtered through the windows. The neon sign buzzed faintly, tired after fighting the storm all night. Miss Loretta was already awake. She moved slowly, her joints stiff from the long night, but her heart was light. She stood behind the counter, humming to herself as she cracked eggs and warmed the skillet. The smell of bacon soon drifted through the air, mixing with the comforting scent of coffee. One by one, the bikers began to stir. They stretched, yawned, rubbed their eyes, and for a moment, they looked more like sleepy boys than rough men. "Morning, sunshine," Loretta said with a teasing grin as Hank, the leader, sat up and rubbed his face. He chuckled, voice still heavy with sleep. "You sure you didn't put something in that soup, ma'am?" "I haven't slept that good in years," Loretta smiled. "Just a dash of care and a sprinkle of peace, sugar. Works better than medicine." The bikers laughed softly, grateful for the warmth in her voice. They gathered at the counter as she set out plates of scrambled eggs, biscuits, and gravy. The diner glowed with soft chatter and the clinking of forks against plates. For a moment, it felt like family. Hank looked around and said, "You really didn't have to do all this." "Miss Loretta," she shook her head, waving a spatula in the air. "Now don't you go spoiling my fun. I don't get many hungry guests these days, and you boys made this place feel alive again." Cody, the youngest of the group, leaned on the counter and said, "You sure treated us better than anyone else ever has." Loretta smiled kindly. "That's 'cause I see folks with my heart, not my eyes." Those words settled deep into them. None of them said anything for a while. They just ate quietly, the sound of birds chirping outside filling the silence. When breakfast was done, the men began gathering their things. Jackets zipped, helmets tucked under arms, gloves pulled tight. The sun was rising over the hills and the road ahead glowed gold. Hank approached Loretta with a small envelope in his hand. "Ma'am," he said gently, "we want to thank you for last night. You didn't judge us. You didn't turn us away. You gave us something we haven't felt in a long time. Kindness." Loretta wiped her hands on her apron and looked at him with a soft smile. "Baby, I didn't do nothing special. I just did what's right." But Hank shook his head. "You did more than that. You reminded us that good still exists." He placed the envelope on the counter and nodded. "That's for you," Loretta frowned. "Now what's this?" "Just a little something from the boys," he said with a small smile. "Use it for the diner, or for yourself." Before she could argue, he was already turning to leave. The others followed him one by one, stopping to hug her or shake her hand. Cody was the last to leave. He hesitated at the door, then turned and said quietly, "You're the kind of person this world needs more of, ma'am. Don't ever change." Loretta chuckled, though her eyes were glassy. "I'm too old to change, sweetheart." The engines roared to life outside, breaking the still morning air. 9 motorcycles lined up in front of the diner, sunlight glinting off their chrome. The sound was deep and steady like a heartbeat. Loretta stepped out onto the porch, shielding her eyes from the light. The men waved before riding off down the wet road, their jackets fluttering behind them. The rumble of their engines faded slowly until all that was left was the whisper of wind and the chirping of birds. She stood there for a long time, the morning breeze lifting the ends of her apron. Then she sighed softly and went back inside. When she opened the envelope, she found several folded bills inside, more than she'd seen in months, and a small note. It read, "Thank you for seeing us when no one else would. You've got 9 friends on the road forever." Loretta pressed the note to her chest and smiled through tears. "Lord," she whispered, "you sure know how to send blessings in leather jackets." That day she cleaned the diner, humming softly as sunlight poured through the windows. Everything felt brighter, warmer, somehow new. She didn't tell anyone in town what had happened. She didn't need to. For her, it was enough to know that somewhere out there, 9 riders carried a little bit of her kindness with them. But destiny had another surprise waiting. Because the next morning, as she poured her first cup of coffee, she heard it again, the deep rumble of engines. At first, she thought her mind was playing tricks. But when she looked outside, her hands froze in midair. Down the road came a sea of motorcycles, dozens of them. Chrome glinted like lightning in the sun. It wasn't 9 this time. It was 100. The sound shook the ground as they pulled into her parking lot, row after row of riders, each wearing the same emblem, the Hell's Angels wings. Loretta's heart raced, but not with fear. She smiled, tears filling her eyes as she whispered, "Well, y'all really did mean it." And that was the beginning of a morning the whole town would remember forever. The next morning began quietly, just like any other. Miss Loretta had woken up early, as she always did, to brew her first pot of coffee. The sky outside was clear, washed clean after the storm, and the smell of wet earth still lingered in the air. The birds were singing again, the kind of soft music that makes you feel like the world has started fresh. She unlocked the diner door, flipped the open sign, and turned on the radio. Gospel music floated gently through the room. Everything was calm, peaceful, just the way she liked it. She was humming and wiping down the counter when she heard it. At first it was faint, a low, steady rumble in the distance. It could have been thunder, but the sky was too blue. The sound grew louder, deeper, stronger, and like the heartbeat of the earth itself. The windows began to tremble slightly. Loretta froze, a cloth still in her hand, and looked up. Her heart skipped. Out on the horizon, beyond the long country road, a wave of glinting chrome appeared. Motorcycles. Not just a few this time, dozens, maybe 100. They came in tight formation, their engines growling in perfect rhythm. The sunlight bounced off their helmets and polished bikes like sparks flying off fire. Loretta's mouth fell open. "Lord have mercy," she whispered, her voice barely a breath. She stepped outside, the wind lifting her apron as the sound filled the air. Powerful, alive, echoing through every corner of that small town. One by one, the bikes turned into her gravel parking lot, forming neat rows that stretched almost to the road. People nearby peeked out their windows, curious and a little afraid. It wasn't every day that 100 Hell's Angels rolled into town, but there was no chaos. No shouting, just order, respect, and a strange sense of calm beneath all that thunder. Hank, the same man who'd led the group the night before, climbed off his bike first. He wasn't wearing his helmet this time. His beard glistened in the sun, and his smile was big enough to reach his eyes. He walked toward Loretta with his hands raised, his boots crunching on the gravel. "Mornin', Miss Loretta," he said with a grin. Loretta blinked, still half in disbelief. "What on earth is all this, Hank?" He chuckled. "Told you we wouldn't forget you, ma'am." She looked around at the sea of bikers filling her lot, men and women, young and old, all wearing the same patch, all looking toward her with smiles and nods of respect. Hank continued, "Word got around about what you did for us. How you opened your doors when everyone else would have turned us away. The boy spread the story and, well, looks like you made a few more friends." Loretta shook her head slowly, tears forming in her eyes. "I didn't do anything special, child. I just gave y'all some soup and a warm place to stay." Hank smiled gently. "That's exactly why we're here." The engines shut off one by one, leaving behind a deep silence, the kind that feels sacred. Then came the sound of boots hitting the ground as the riders dismounted. A few of them carried boxes, others carried signs. One big man stepped forward and placed a large basket of groceries on the diner steps. Another came with a sack of coffee beans and supplies. "We heard business was slow," said one rider, his voice humble. "Figured we'd help stock you up." Another woman wearing a red bandana smiled and handed Loretta a thick envelope. donations. From riders all over the state. You took care of our brothers. Now we're taking care of you. Loretta's lips trembled. Oh my, y'all didn't have to do this. Hank shook his head. You didn't have to take us in either, but you did. This, he gestured around. This is us paying it forward. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she pressed her hands to her heart. The sight before her didn't seem real. 100 bikers gathered outside her little diner, not for trouble, not for fame, but for love, loyalty, and gratitude. Soon the air filled with laughter and life. Some bikers began washing the diner's windows. Others painted her old wooden sign that had started to fade. A few started grilling outside, turning the gathering into an impromptu cookout. Music played from portable speakers and the sound of joy echoed through the small town. Locals began to peek out from their homes, nervous at first, but curiosity got the better of them. Slowly they approached, families, kids, shop owners, and before long everyone was smiling and talking together. The town that had once looked at bikers with suspicion now saw them differently. They weren't outlaws that day. They were friends, protectors, family. Loretta stood at the door of her diner, looking out at all of them with misty eyes. You boys and girls done gone and made me cry, she said, laughing through her tears. Hank grinned. That's all right, ma'am. You made us believe there's still good in this world. Seems fair. She looked around at the sea of bikes, the smell of food, the music, the laughter. For a moment she thought of her late husband, how proud he would have been. Then she smiled softly and whispered to herself. He said this diner was for travelers. Guess he was right after all. The sun rose higher, shining down on the diner that love had rebuilt. The storm that had once threatened to wash everything away had instead brought something beautiful. A family, formed not by blood, but by kindness. The roar of engines faded slowly as the morning sun climbed higher, bathing the diner in a golden light that made everything look almost magical. Miss Loretta stood on the front steps, her apron fluttering in the gentle breeze, surrounded by 100 riders who had come not to take, but to give. Her heart was still racing. She could hardly believe what she was seeing. The same Hells Angels she had welcomed out of kindness were now filling her parking lot with laughter, food, and generosity. They had turned her quiet little diner into a celebration of gratitude and humanity. As the day went on, more and more people arrived. Locals from town came first, curious, cautious, whispering among themselves. They had seen the storm, seen the bikes, and wondered what was happening at Loretta's place. But when they stepped closer and saw the smiles, the laughter, and the joy, their hesitation melted away. Miss Loretta, what's going on here? Asked old Mr. Jenkins, the postman, scratching his head. Loretta laughed softly. Just a few friends coming by for breakfast, honey. That line became the talk of the town. A few folks snapped photos on their phones. Loretta standing between rows of bikes, hugging leather-clad riders, her smile brighter than the sun. They posted them online with captions like, "When kindness comes full circle" and "The grandma who fed the Hells Angels." By evening, those pictures began spreading like wildfire. Within hours, her story had gone viral. People from all over the country started sharing it. News outlets, blogs, and social media pages picked it up. Headlines appeared everywhere. Black Grandma shelters bikers from storm. Their response the next day will melt your heart. A simple act of kindness turns into a miracle for one woman's diner. By the next morning, reporters began showing up at her diner. Television vans parked along the road. Photographers stood outside, hoping to capture the woman whose kindness had moved millions. Loretta was stunned. "Mercy me," she whispered, peeking through the blinds at the crowd gathering outside. "All this fuss over a bowl of soup?" Hank stood beside her, smiling proudly. "It ain't about the soup, Miss Loretta. It's about you. You showed people that kindness still exists in this world, and folks are hungry for that." When she stepped outside, cameras flashed and voices called her name. But Loretta stayed the same, humble, calm, her voice gentle as always. "I just did what my mama taught me," she told the reporters. "If somebody's cold, you warm them. If they're hungry, you feed them. That's how the world's supposed to work." Those words touched everyone who heard them. People began traveling from other towns just to eat at her diner. The small parking lot that once stood empty was now full every day. Truck drivers stopped for pie, Families came for breakfast and tourists lined up just to meet Grandma Loretta. The bikers kept their promise too. They didn't just visit that one day, they made it a tradition. Every few weeks, riders from different states would show up to check on her, bringing friends, supplies, and laughter. Her diner, once fading into memory, had become a landmark, a living symbol of compassion. Inside, Loretta kept things simple. She never raised her prices or changed her menu. Her biscuits were still flaky, her pies still homemade, and her smile never left her face. One afternoon, a young journalist asked her, "Miss Loretta, what does it feel like to be famous?" She chuckled, shaking her head. "Child, I'm not famous. I'm just blessed. Fame fades, but kindness lasts forever." The reporter smiled, but her answer stayed with him. Later, he wrote, "In a world divided by fear and judgment, one grandmother reminded us that love and decency still matter. She didn't just serve food, she served hope." And he was right. Her story traveled far beyond her little town. School teachers shared it in classrooms. Churches spoke about it in sermons, and strangers sent letters from across the world. Some said her story made them cry. Others said it made them believe again. In good people, in second chances, in kindness without reason. One letter came from a young woman who had lost faith in humanity. It read, "Your story saved me. I was giving up on people, but you made me remember that light still exists in the darkest storm." Loretta kept every letter in a shoebox behind the counter. When business slowed, she'd open it, pull out a few, and smile at the words written by strangers who had somehow become family. And every morning, she'd whisper the same prayer she always had. "Thank you, Lord, for another day to do good." Because to Miss Loretta, fame wasn't the miracle. Love was. And that love had traveled farther than any storm ever could. Years passed, but Miss Loretta's diner never lost its magic. The storm that once threatened to destroy everything had instead planted the seeds of something unforgettable. A story that would live on far beyond her little town. Her diner, once quiet and almost forgotten, had become a place of pilgrimage. Travelers from every corner of the country stopped there just to sit where it all began. At that corner booth where 9 bikers had found warmth during a cold storm. Families took pictures by the window where sunlight poured in, and every wall inside now carried framed photos of riders, families, and smiling faces. Above the counter hung a simple wooden sign painted in elegant white letters, "Kindness served daily." Miss Loretta had put it up herself, the day after everything went viral. She said it wasn't just a slogan, it was a promise. Even as the years added silver to her hair and slowed her steps, she never stopped doing what she loved. Every morning she opened the diner at sunrise, humming softly to her old gospel tunes, her apron tied neatly around her waist. People came not just for her food but for her presence, that calm, comforting energy that made everyone feel like they mattered. Sometimes, when the road outside filled with the thunder of motorcycles, she'd peek out the window and smile. The riders never forgot her. Every year, hundreds of them would return, their engines roaring like an anthem of gratitude. They called it Loretta's Ride. It wasn't an event, and it was a tradition. Bikers from across states would ride to her diner, park their bikes neatly in rows, and fill the lot with laughter and love. They'd share stories, bring food donations, and leave behind envelopes with notes that said things like, "Keep spreading the light," or "You reminded us what family means." And every year, Miss Loretta would stand at the door waving, her eyes full of happy tears. "You boys sure know how to make a grandma proud," she'd say. But the impact didn't stop there. Her story became part of something bigger: kindness movements, school projects, church sermons, and documentaries. Students wrote essays about her. Artists painted murals. One small act, a bowl of soup, a warm seat, an open heart, had rippled across the world. When asked how it felt, she always gave the same humble smile. "I didn't change the world," she'd say softly. "I just showed it what it could still be." As time moved on, Miss Loretta's steps grew slower, but her heart never dimmed. She'd sit by the diner window most afternoons, watching the road, greeting every traveler who walked through the door. Sometimes she'd pull out the old shoebox full of letters, and hundreds now, and reread a few whenever she missed her friends on the road. One day, a young woman entered the diner, carrying a camera. She was a journalist from a big city, there to do a follow-up story years after Loretta's kindness had gone viral. when she asked, "Miss Loretta, do you ever wonder why your story touched so many people?" The old woman smiled and looked out at the sunlight streaming across the counter. "Honey," she said, "people remember storms, but they hold on tighter to the light that comes after." That single sentence became the closing line of her story, one that would be quoted in books, on posters, and in speeches about hope and compassion. A few winters later, when the diner lights went out one quiet evening, the world mourned the woman who had once opened her doors to strangers. But her story didn't end there, not really. The following spring, hundreds of motorcycles thundered down that same country road again, just as they had every year. But this time they rode in silence. No engines revving, no music, just the steady hum of tires rolling across the earth, carrying memories in every mile. When they reached the diner, they found it exactly as she'd left it, neat, warm, and timeless. A new sign had been placed outside, written by her family and friends. It read, "In memory of Miss Loretta, who taught us that kindness never dies." The riders parked their bikes, took off their helmets, and stood quietly. Some prayed, some cried, others smiled softly, remembering the night she changed their lives. And then, in a moment that no one had planned, Hank, now older, gray-bearded, and gentle-eyed, started the first engine. One by one, others followed until the air filled with the sound of unity, a sound that echoed like thunder rolling across heaven. From that day on, Loretta's diner remained open, run by locals who vowed to keep her spirit alive. The sign above the counter stayed just the same: kindness served daily, and travelers who came hungry, for food or for hope, always left with both. Miss Loretta's story became more than a legend. It became a lesson that love doesn't need a reason, that compassion costs nothing, and that even the smallest act can build bridges strong enough to weather any storm. Because in the end, kindness doesn't fade. It multiplies, and somewhere on a quiet country road, beneath a sunrise as golden as her heart, it still rides, in every act of goodness, in every stranger's smile, and in every soul that remembers her name.